well, the difference between Protestants and Catholics is they hold to the authority of tradition. We reject it. Obermann demonstrated that the position is more difficult than that in the Reformation. He articulated what he called Tradition 1 and Tradition 2. And Tradition 1 was the exegetical tradition that you could trace back through the Middle Ages to the early Church, where thinking was regulated by the text of Scripture. You might say, well, I didn't realise that the medievals took Scripture seriously. Just as an aside observation, in order to be the equivalent of a professor teaching theology in the Middle Ages, you would have had to have lectured and preached through more Scripture than any tenured professor in any Bible department or seminary in the United States of America today. That's how seriously the medievals took Scripture. Now, there are problems in their approach, but they did take Scripture seriously. There is a T1 tradition to trace. The problem, as Obermann saw it, is T2. And that's where the theological tradition starts to drift away from Scripture and become entirely determined by the teaching magisterium of the Church. So one might say, for example, that the virgin birth of Christ is articulated through an exegetical tradition. I would want to argue that the Immaculate Conception of the Virgin Mary, that's a T2 thing. That stands out with that exegetical tradition. That's where the Pope and the Cardinals are intervening to say something's the case, even though the exegetical basis for it is almost non-existent.